Hello friends and dewdrops, and welcome to my channel for another update on Israel and what is going on here. And this video is going to be divided into two. In the first part of the video I'm going to discuss recent events, and in the second part of it I'm going to try and describe the way that the protest is being dealt, and the construction of the protest, and to disparage a little bit of the untruth that is being spread about the protests. So let's start with the updates. So last week, the Supreme Court had a hearing regarding the law that has passed, that the first law of the attempt of our government to override our democracy, which is called the law of to abolish the reasonableness doctrine. So in a few words, what is the reasonableness doctrine? The reasonableness doctrine is one of the doctrines that the court has in order to look into decisions and into non-decisions that the government and other elected officials make. And it doesn't have to be parliament members, it could be also mayors and high officials. But they limited it to ministers and parliament members and the coalition and the government. And the reasonableness doctrine says that the court is, if a minister, for example, is deciding to dismiss someone because he wants to appoint a friend of his, and this friend has no qualifications whatsoever, but he is one hell of a friend of this minister, and the minister decides to dismiss a very good worker. For just one example that we had in the past few weeks, our internal affairs minister decided to dismiss the CEO of our postal services. Now, the postal services have been in a very, very bad situation for years, and it has deteriorated because it was managed in a very bad way. And as many people started using the post, especially for packages and stuff like that, it became more and more difficult to give service, and a lot of complaints were issued about that. And this CEO of the postal services started rehabilitating the post, and it started working, and we saw an improvement. And then came the minister and decided that he doesn't like the way that this person works, and this person is actually religious. He's actually someone who is very, very qualified, someone who has a lot of successes in his in his past, in his history, and he is, but he's not political. And the minister wanted to appoint one of his friends, and he decided to fire the the CEO. So this is something that is now standing in court waiting for some kind of a decision, because the CEO went to court and said that this was not a reasonable decision, but the court right now is unable to make a ruling that this is not a reasonable decision, because right now the reasonableness doctrine is not allowed for the court to use, because the government took it out. Now, what the government did was they amended a part of, or a small section of, what is called a basic law. Now, Israel is a very, very weak democracy. Now, we ourselves only realized it in the past 8 months. Even 9 months since January, because what we have is, we have the parliament, and the government is actually ruling the parliament, and they are kind of the same entity, because the parliament does not have any kind of power by themselves. So the government and the parliament are kind of the same. The opposition cannot do anything once the government have a majority. And then we have the judicial system, and the judicial system needs to be strong in order to be able to overrule sometimes when unlawful laws, to be able to make rulings or make decisions when the ministers or when the parliament is making laws that are unlawful. So we need our judicial system to be strong, because that is the only barrier from our democracy from collapsing. Now, around the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, because we don't have a constitution, one of our that was one of the Likud governments, and one of the Supreme Court judges made this devised this plan of having the structure or skeleton of basic laws that will be the skeleton of a future constitution. And they started making laws that were the skeleton for a future constitution, like the law for equality, equal rights, freedom of speech, all sorts of laws that are safeguarding our democracy. And when these laws were legislated, it took a long time. They thought about it, and it was a really long process that every word was thought about, and there were a lot of discussions. It was a long process. It was not something that was done in a matter of weeks. Now, we're talking about a big law that is the basic law of ruling, that is making some kind of basic rules about how the judiciary system has to work. And this is one section, one passage of this law that talks about the Reasonableness Act. And what the government decided was to change this section, this very small passage, in a way that the court cannot use the Reasonableness Act to pass any kind of criticism on decisions that the government or the ministers are either making, or if they are deciding not to act. For example, we are right now in a deficit of judges, and in next month 2 judges from the Supreme Court are retiring. So we are in desperate need to elect new judges. Now, our judges are elected by a committee that is supposed to be a very balanced committee and not a political committee. And we are fighting to keep this committee non-political, because we don't want the government to control the judges that are elected, because if they do that, then they control the courts, and we don't want them to control the courts, so the court will be independent. So right now the system goes in a way that the government cannot have an automatic majority in that committee, and the Minister of Justice doesn't like that, so he is not convening the committee, and they are not electing judges. So, for example, right now there is there is a ruling that is waiting to be ruled by the court, and the court asked for the minister to explain why is he deferring the decision to convene the committee. And he says that this is part of the part of this law is that the court can not pass any kind of criticism on decisions of a minister not to make a decision or not to do something. So that is the law. And prior to the hearing last week, there was a big propaganda from the government and the coalition members and parliament members and members of the Likud, and even the chairman of the Knesset, chairman of the parliament, who kept on saying that the court is not allowed to even examine a basic law, because basic laws are sacred, because it is a part of the future constitution. But the problem is that basic laws are being legislated just like every other law, with a very normal, regular majority. And that means that if they have 61 votes, they can pass the law, and that means that they can decide to pass any law, and that could be the most undemocratic law. For example, deciding that Arabs cannot vote any longer and call it a basic law, and then tell the courts you cannot criticize this law because it's a basic law. So this is what they were trying to say. They brought all sorts of scholars, professors that kept on saying that basic laws need to be treated differently. But basic laws, as long as they are being legislated exactly the same way as normal laws, then they should be treated the same way. But Netanyahu even made 22 interviews for foreign media and did not commit to abide to the court's decision in none of those media interviews. And other members of parliament also threatened not to abide to the court's decision. And not abiding to the court decision, that means a constitutional crisis. And a constitutional crisis, that means that the army, the police, and other policing forces in Israel will have to choose who do they listen to. Do they listen to the court, or do they listen to the government? And that could lead to a civil war. So we are on the verge of a civil war here. Right now, since the hearing is so sensitive, the leader of the Supreme Court decided to make that hearing listened to by the entire retinue of the court. That means 15 judges that sat on the bench. And that was a fascinating 13 and a half hours of hearing. I listened to most of it. The part that I didn't was because I went to a demonstration of supporting the Supreme Court. So I listened later on. I listened to the part that I missed, but most of it I listened live. It was fascinating, and the horrible part was the way that the chairman of the Committee of Legislation in Simcha Rotman, who is a coalition member, a member of the government, talked to the judges, and the way that the lawyer that represented the government talked to the judges. And I will explain in a minute. So first we're talking about Simcha Rotman, who is the chairman of the legislation committee. He is a very far right person, very extreme, very unpleasant person. He conducted the whole process of making this law in a very aggressive, unpleasant way. This law was made in full, I don't remember exactly, but that was a matter of weeks, not even months. And he didn't let people talk. He threw people out of the room if they tried to talk without permission, because he wouldn't let them talk. He wouldn't let the opposition bring their own specialists, their own people that will talk about the dangers of this law. So he was very, very aggressive. He was very unpleasant. He is, I don't know if you know, but he was in the United States a few months ago. He was followed by a woman that was demonstrating, and as this is one thing that we do in Israel and abroad, people are, when they see someone from the coalition or someone from the government, they are following them, they are calling them, they are saying shame, they are screaming, crying after them, why are they doing what they're doing. So he was, and she was crying after him with using this megaphone, and he was very, very angry. He snatched the megaphone from that woman, and he was very violent. So he has this violent streak in him, and he stood in front of the judges and said to them, how can you even be impartial? How can we trust you to give just judgment? How can we trust you to be impartial when we are talking about your own honor? As if taking away this reasonableness act is a doctrine, is about the court's honor. And the way that he spoke in this disparaging and dishonoring way to the judges, it was so humiliating and it was so terrible that one of the judges actually said to him, I think that you spoke too long. Isn't there anyone that needs to speak after you? He was on the verge of contempt of court. I think that if it was anyone else, anyone else would have been taken out of court in contempt. That was really horrible. And then there was the lawyer that represented the government, and that wasn't the Attorney General who was supposed to be. Now, why wasn't it the Attorney General? Because the Attorney General supported our side. She supported the claimants. And she sent her representative to support our side of the case. So once she supported the side of the claimants, she could not defend the government. So the government had to take a private lawyer to defend their case. So this private lawyer stood in front of the judges and said something in the sort of, the Declaration of Independence is not a liable document. This is a document that was signed hastily and was written hastily and was signed by 37 people just like that. And we need to abide by it today, 75 years later. Now, for the American people here, it's over 200 years since the Declaration of Independence in America was written and signed, and I suppose that you are still very much living by it. And I don't remember exactly when the Magna Carta was written in Britain, but I think that this document really is still very much sacred in England. And to say about the Declaration of Independence, a document that was really thought about. I mean, at the time, you need to think about it. In 1948, the people of Israel were already fighting their independence war even before the State of Israel was declared, because the Arabs started the war at the time of the UN decision of the 29th of November in 1947. The day after that decision, the Arabs started the first phase of the independence war. So the Israelis were already fighting the independence war. So while fighting the independence war and while receiving so many people that Holocaust survivors that were coming from Europe, and so many people that were coming from the Arab countries, Jews that were coming from the Arab countries because they were persecuted there. So receiving all of these masses of people to the country that was just being founded and was struggling financially and still didn't have a lot of weapons, and just think about it that at the time in 1948 the United States was not our friend. Our country, and this is something that you need to remember this for the next videos, because the next videos I will talk about it, but our country was founded by people that were socialist, and they at that time the Soviet Union were thinking about whether or not they want us to become one of their supported countries, but they were supporting the Arab countries. So we were not supported by anyone. So the only guns that we were getting were guns that we got from Czechoslovakia at the time. And that was illegal because there was an embargo of weapons to the area. So, but the Arabs were getting weapons from the Far East. They were getting weapons from the Soviet Union. So the Arabs were not lacking of weapons. We fought the independence war with weapons that we invented and with weapons that we made, homemade bombs. So this is how we fought most of the war. And at that time, the Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, and other people that maybe you heard about them or not, if any one of you saw Golda, the movie that is being now on the screens, so it's the same Golda Meir. So she was one of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence. So these people sat for weeks and thought about every word they wrote in that declaration. And 37 people who signed the declaration were people that were representing every section of the people that lived in Israel, including the far right and the far left, including the religious, including the Hasidic, all of those sections of people that lived in Israel at the time, where they had a representative that signed the declaration. So these were the 37 people that signed the declaration, and this was not this obscure document that was written hastily and signed hastily. And after it was signed, it was driven to the Anglo-Palestine Bank, and what was put in the safe of this bank to be kept for prosperity, because the leaders, Ben-Gurion was not even sure that Israel will survive the independence war. So they wanted this document to survive the state of Israel. So, because they did not know how long the state of Israel will survive. So that is so then comes this lawyer, and so eager to defend the government and their non-democratic steps, and he disparages this document. And you know that I have quite a lot of WhatsApp groups that I am discussing things with, and we pass a lot of humoric material as well. So one of the very funny and humorous cartoons that came up after this was this cartoon of the people of Israel in Sinai, when Moses is coming down from the Mount of Sinai with the Ten Amendments on the wait, I have to remember how it's being said, but they tell him, who chose you? You are not elected, and who is God? I mean, we did not elect God. And this document that is written on these slates of covenant, the covenant slates, yes, this document, this is something that was written on these slates of stone. I mean, in 40 days. This is not something that is abiding us. We want the golden statue. So this is just a cartoon. Of course, nobody really sees that as serious, but this was a joke. After the court's hearing, people from the coalition came out and said they do not intend to abide to the court's decision if the court decides to wait. I will try to, well, if the court decides to abolish this law. So they decided to, they came out, and the chairman of the Knesset, the chairman of our parliament, that is the most hypocritical person ever, because we're talking about an homosexual man who lives with a partner. He married abroad, and he has 2 children that he got via a surrogate. Now, he is able to live with his partner and have his children legally in Israel because of the Supreme Court, because of the Supreme Court's ruling that made the government accept marriages of same-sex couples that were made abroad, because it cannot be made here. And it made the Internal Affairs Office give fathers who were made fathers via surrogate their paternship because they got this since although it was made outside of Israel, although they are homosexuals, although the Minister of Internal Affairs is a Hasidic Jew that is opposing homosexuals and believes that homosexuals is the worst enemy of Israel, worse than Hezbollah, worse than Hamas, worse than Iran. This is the worst enemy of Israel. So the Supreme Court is the main reason that man, the chairman of the Knesset, is able to live the life that he lives. And he comes out and he says that he is not going to listen to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court comes out and says that this is a non-lawful law that needs to be abolished. So this is about the hearing. And then we had Rosh Hashanah, and in the evening of the Rosh Hashanah, which is tonight, Benjamin Netanyahu is going to New York, actually is going to the United States, and he starts with San Francisco, and then he's going to New York to speak in the UN convention. So the protest movement is going to follow him from Ben Gurion Airport and all the way through his visit. So right now, as I speak, people are there in the airport making a lot of noise. I just came back from a demonstration. We have been demonstrating today instead of yesterday, because yesterday was a holiday. And we have demonstrations all through the week, also here in Israel as well. But in the United States, they already started with all sorts of activities. But the first activity was projecting in big letters the message on the United Nations building. The message, I will send you I will put out the clip at the end of this video. It says, "Save Israel's democracy, do not believe crime Minister Netanyahu." So his first meeting is going to be with Elon Musk to speak about artificial intelligence, because Netanyahu is so known for his artificial intelligence. This is the only intelligence he has. He is a known liar. So he's been telling lies ever since he had a phone call with President Biden, and he said that President Biden invited him to the White House. Now, Biden made sure that everybody knew that he did not invite Bibi to the White House. And he asked Tom Friedman, who is a journalist, he asked him to come out and say out loud that Bibi was not invited to the White House. Now, he is going to meet him, but as far as I understand, it's going to be a very short meeting and in his hotel. So it is the first time ever since I think we became good friends with the United States that a prime minister is being elected, and for 9 months he has not been invited to meet the President of the United States. And even when there is a meeting, it's not in Washington, it's not in the White House. So this is just to show us how horrible the relationship is being, and how deteriorating the relationship is between Israel and the United States. And right now, the Saudi Arabia that was in talks with the United States about warming the relationship with Israel, and there were talks about probably giving Saudi Arabia the permission to enrich uranium as a reward for maybe signing a peace contract with us. Right now, they came out and said they don't want to go on with these negotiations. That is something that came out yesterday. So the world is understanding that Netanyahu does not have the power that he used to have. Why does Elon Musk meet him? I don't know, but why does Netanyahu is going to meet Elon Musk after he said a very anti-Semitic remark only a few months ago? I don't know. So the protest movement is going to follow Netanyahu everywhere he goes, so you will probably see them, hear them, maybe it will be on the news. Just try to find the media talks about it. Okay, so this was the update. A very long one, but this was the update. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the movements in the protests and a little bit about the history of the protests. So why am I doing that? Because as you can see, every time I'm wearing a little bit of a different shirt, and this time I'm wearing this shirt, and this shirt is it is a protest shirt, and this shirt belongs to the Bereft families forum. I will talk about them in a while, but we have a lot of movements in the protests, and one of the things that every movement does is have its symbols, have its t-shirts, and each movement has its own its own private protests, or its own organizing its own activities, and then there are the major activities that are combining us, everyone. So the protests altogether started in 2016, and that was when the information about Netanyahu's crimes started coming out, and the information about the police investigating Netanyahu for bribery, for a breach of trust, for fraud. They started investigating Netanyahu around that time, and the then who was the one who was then why am I always forgetting? Attorney General, the one who was then Attorney General, Avichai Mendelblit. He was a religious person. He was a personal friend of Netanyahu. Netanyahu was the prime minister then, as he is now. He was on and off for 15 years prime minister, with a very small gap of a year and a half. So at that time, Mendelblit was taking his time and not deciding, and the protests started around that, trying to make him decide and trying to push him into deciding to indict, because he was not giving him the permission to indict Netanyahu. It's a little bit close to what is happening with Trump right now, the time that it took to indict Trump. But once Netanyahu was indicted and it was clear that he was going to go to trial, then I think that he started thinking about how can I get out of it. And the only way for him to get out of it was to sign this pact with the devil, which is the very extreme right-wing parties and the extreme religious Hasidic Jews in order to destroy Israel, but destroy their judiciary system and not get into jail. So but the protests then were composed by two main forces. There were the black flags that were led by Shikma Bresler, who leads the protests today as well, and the other fraction was a crime minister that is still led by Ishai Hadass. Now, Ishai Hadass is a loner, and he is very much keeps to himself. There was an attempt to join forces with him as well, but it didn't work well. He really likes to do things by himself. Once Avichai Mendelblit decided to indict Netanyahu, the protests just stopped until the current situation. So afterwards, after the indictments came out, there was another government, and we thought that it will last. But Netanyahu and his friends that were then in the opposition did everything in their power to make the lives of the people from the then coalition a living hell, and they managed to convince two of the coalition members then to leave the government. And once they left the government fell, and then we went to another election, and this was the fifth election in a span of 3 years, and that was not 3 years, I think, something about 3 to 4 years. And in that elections, they got the 64 mandates that they are so proud of, and they formed the current government. So in January, after the Minister of Justice came out with the reform plan for the judiciary system, and we realized that this means the end of democracy, people started forming all sorts of movements, and it started small and it started growing. So it started with the high-tech people that formed their movement, and the women that formed the building an alternative movement, which is the movement of the slaves from the Handmaid's Tale series, and the LGBTQ formed with the artists a front that is called the Pink Front, and there was, of course, the movement that is always existed in Israel, what is called the anti occupation movement that of course always existed and was now getting more power, and naturally it was also all sorts of smaller fractions. But what happened is that the Black Flags united with others and other leaders like Moshe Redman and Ran Harnevo and Amidro, which are leaders that can speak to other people. Part of the leaders like Yaya Pink, which is who is a person who is a religious person, but a very liberal one. People all together they formed what is called Kaplan Force. Now, why is it called Kaplan Force? Because the place where the main Tel Aviv demonstrations are being held is called the Kaplan Junction in Tel Aviv, and now it is called Democracy Junction. It was formally changed by the mayor of Tel Aviv, but this is Kaplan Street and Kaplan Junction, and this is why the name of the main force of these demonstrations is Kaplan Force. So Kaplan Force have their shirts, t-shirts that have multiple colors, and usually they have the slogan of Kaplan Force, or sometimes they have this fist on it. And then there are all sorts of colors that are unique to a movement, because the women are the red, and the doctors are always also red. The doctors movement is called the white coats. So we also have red shirts. Mothers have purple shirts. So do the youth. They also have purple shirts. High tech have bluish shirts. All sorts of shirts that go with that are symbol of a movement. So and of course there is this big movement that is called the Brothers and Sisters of Arms, and the brothers, and you will, and the ones of those of you that will watch 60 Minutes about the demonstrations will see Brothers in Arms, and they have a green shirt, olive green shirt, and the men, and the women have a red variation, which I wear many times. So the Brothers and Sisters in Arms are people that used to be soldiers. Some of them used to be, most of them used to be fighters. Some were not, but they represent the people that used to be in the army, the reserve. So this is the most, more or less the protest as it is. Now this shirt, as I said, is of the forum of the Bereft families. Now the Bereft families are families that come from both sides. This is from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, and it's families who lost their dear ones in action, in terrorist attacks, in mistakes. So if a youth from a place in the West Bank is trying to go from one place to another, and someone suspects him to be a terrorist and shoots him, that is a mistake, and he loses his life, and the family is the one that needs to deal with that. And in many times, the people that are left behind are full of vengeful feelings, and all they want is to avenge his blood, especially in the Arab culture, that blood vengeance is something that is very strong. But also in the Israeli side, there is a lot of resentment against the Palestinians, against the ones who took our loved ones, especially if it's in terrorist attacks, because in terrorist attacks we're talking about people that were innocent, and they were not soldiers, so they were not, they did not sign for losing their lives as a soldier does. But still, it doesn't really matter whether you lose your child or your brother or sister in a terrorist attack, or whether it's in an operational in an operation. You still are there with the pain, and you still need to deal with the pain. And then there are two routes. And for those of you who might have watched Fauda, and those of you who have Netflix, I do recommend, if you are interested, watch Fauda, because Fauda can give you a very clear understanding of how things are in the Middle East, especially in Israel, in the West Bank. In many ways, it is showing that in many times, the family, especially youngsters that are left behind, someone who dies in any way, it doesn't really matter how, they are left with a lot of vengeful feelings, and they want to go out and avenge themselves, and they usually join some kind of a terrorist movement, and they are going to try and either fight against us or come out and do some kind of a terrorist attack. But once in a while, there is someone who realizes that this is not going to bring back his loved one, and that this is not going to help his country, not going to help his brothers and sisters, it's not going to help anyone. And if he wants to help his people, if he wants, or she wants to help their the solutions to come, the only way is by having a talk, by talking to one another. So this forum came from this idea, and the forum is composed from families from both sides, and both Israeli families are going to the West Bank, and Palestinian families are coming to Israel. And up until this coalition and this Minister of Education, they used to come to high schools and talk to high school children. And as difficult as it might be, and sometimes some of the children are very right-wing because of their parents, of what they hear at home, of the messages that they hear around them. So, and youngsters are always very much more extreme than when we get older. Then we realize that things are not so black and white. But youngsters are very much are angrier, and they find it more difficult to forgive. But anyway, so up until this coalition, they used to come into schools, talk to children whenever they were able, and they would convince a lot of children that the way to resolve the issues is by talking. It's by listening to one another, and that was really an amazing work that they did. But with this Minister of Education, they were taken out of schools. Now, right now, they're waiting for the Supreme Court to decide on on their petition to allow them to come back to the schools. So they're waiting for the Supreme Court to hear their petition and to decide. This is a non-reasonable decision of the minister, so we will see whether or not the court agrees with us about it. But at any rate, they still have meetings with adults. So I got this shirt in one of the meetings that I went to. A very, very interesting meeting with someone who lost his brother for one of those mistakes. His brother was killed unlawfully without any reason. And it happens, as it happens on our side, that a missile from Gaza Strip comes and kills children or kills civilians. It happens all the time. It happens when someone decides to get up, when he gets up, he decides to get into a car or a truck and just run over civilians that are waiting in a bus stops. In a bus stop. So it happens. It happens, and in the past 8 months or 9 months since this government was founded, it happens even more than it did before. So we have more and more people that are being added to this cycle of bereavement because of the Israeli-Palestinian disagreement or war, or however you call it. So I think that this forum is very, very important. This is why I'm wearing this shirt today, and the message is important. But I will wear various shirts, and I will tell you which shirt I'm wearing when I'm doing these videos. So this is in a nutshell about the demonstrations and the way that this whole octopus of the way of it's built, the way it's built. So, but as a whole, what happens is that people just they know that every Saturday night there is this constant demonstration in Kaplan and in other places that we know. Every week we have the same places, and sometimes we can get a place on a bus that goes to Kaplan, so we can go there. Sometimes like in the past few months, my health deteriorated quite severely, and that is one reason why, for example, I couldn't go to Jerusalem last week or to Tel Aviv today. So I'm keeping in a radius that is a lot closer to home. So as I said, it's a lot more difficult for me in the past few weeks, 2 months actually. But every one of us does whatever we can, whether it's volunteering, whether it is demonstrations, whether it is whatever we can, we do. And we have our WhatsApps groups, and in those groups we get the information, and we have a lot of discussions. And I am well, as much as I support this forum, which is a left-wing idea, I am also a part of right-wing groups on WhatsApp that are of people that are disillusioned, right-wing voters, people that voted for this government and don't like what happened to the country since this government was founded, that don't like what is happening to the country today, that are very much afraid for our democracy. So I'm also very much in contact with these people and discussing things with them as well. So we have those discussions, we have the information, we know where to go, we know when, for example, one of the ministers or one of the notorious Knesset members goes somewhere, a public place, and if it's near where I am, I will go there and I will cry in his face or in her face, shame, shame. This is not something that we wanted, and you need to explain to us why you're doing what you're doing. So these things are things that are happening daily, and some people can participate every day, some people don't. I can tell you just by in the time that I am doing this video, when I close this video, I will have at least 500 messages on my WhatsApp. So it's very, very hectic, very difficult to do anything else, but I still work in my clinic, which is also very, very difficult, very hectic as well. So I'm doing my best. And I will go on updating you. So in my next update, I will also talk a little bit about a forum that is called Kohelet. So if any one of you is interested, please ask questions. So this is it, and I want to wish you all Shana Tova, which is Happy New Year. The Jewish New Year is starting, and we hope and pray that the new year will be a better year for every one of us, and that it will be a sweet, happy, productive, free, democratic new year to us all. So love you all. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your loving and lovely messages. And I hope that you will tune in the future as well. Bye.